The headlines of that, Crina, bring me chills as a woman who is a consumer of many of these types of products.
Super excited to share a conversation with Dr. Belinda Tan, a physician scientist and entrepreneur who is making waves in the health and wellness world. We'll be talking about navigating the complexity of beauty industry, where Belinda shares her insights on the challenges and the importance of understanding the scientific research in beauty products. If you are curious about how to make informative decisions about your health and beauty products, and if you want to learn more about the latest trends in the wellness, then I think this episode it's for you. I have to tell you, I am personally so curious about your journey into the world of science and beauty. But before that, I would like to talk with you about a given recent scientific findings that over 75% of popular beauty products contain potentially harmful ingredients. And I want to know from you, how we as consumers can navigate this absolutely complicated landscape. What should we be looking for on the ingredients list, and how can we advocate for safer and more transparent practice within beauty industry?
Wow. The headlines of that, Crina, bring me chills as a woman who is a consumer of many of these types of products. And as a scientist, I have many, many questions when I approach hearing something like this. Firstly, it's understanding the source of the scientific information, where, I'd like to know who conducted the study. And this speaks to the quality of data and research, where oftentimes what we struggle with as consumers is understanding the actual truth behind headlines, which can easily be misconstrued and spun out of context by marketing. And that's a danger with any information out there, especially in this digital world. And so with that particular study, 75% is very high. And the questions I would have in my mind approaching it include, what were the products that were tested? Where were they sourced? In what parts of the country or the globe? Because there's different. Are these American products? Are these European? Is it a mix? And also, I would want to know, what do they actually look for in terms of the potentially harmful? And I'm glad you used that particular term, potentially, because a lot of people may read that and not realize that it doesn't say they are harmful. It says they are potentially harmful, could be. And that's a really important nuance to appreciate in any kind of research, which is these are findings from a very, very particular context. So it is important for us to know it's opening up more questions, and that is what research does, is it leads us to even more questions. And then we have to then move on to the next study, the next step of asking even more. So while it says 75%, more than 75% are potentially harmful, it doesn't mean that 75% are harmful. I would also want to understand, of those compounds that were found in this study, what were the studies that identified them as harmful? Were they in animal studies? Were they in populations of, I'll give an example, sea animals, in the Great Barrier Reef, where many corals have suffered from certain types of compounds and sunscreens? Does that then translate to human beings and our physiology? It doesn't necessarily. So there's a lot to unpack with science, and I love that people are studying these questions, and I also really look forward to a future where consumers can be educated to know what questions to ask before they immediately make the assumptions and then get into a mindset of fear, where, oh my goodness, my whole cabinet in my bathroom needs to be cleared out, and I don't know what to do, for my own beauty and health.
And I want to stay as well to this topic, and thank you so much, but I think we should really introduce our listeners why we are talking about clinical studies and why you are opening up so many other questions, because you have so much experience about that. So we can, you can tell us a little bit more about what are you doing in the people science?
Oh, thank you, Crina. People science is such an exciting new venture for my partner and me. Briefly, my background as a trained dermatologist, a pathologist, and also an immunologist, and then over the last almost 15 years being a technology entrepreneur. People science has been the culmination of bringing expertise in building rigorous technologies to conduct clinical research, specifically for the drug development and biopharma world, which has a very high bar of quality, and bringing that knowledge and experience to an ecosystem where all consumers, are participating, and it's around health and wellness, and it's purchasing products and making decisions of what to use and what to take in order to improve our own health and betterment. And what we do at People Science is we've built a technology platform to support doing the research studies, to generate the high quality evidence that actually shows, does this work or does this not? Who does it work on? Does it work for me? Does it not work for me? And we're quite unique in that way in terms of differentiating how we can enable that type of science.
So basically, now everyone can start a clinic, and not everyone, but like small companies can check together with People Science. They don't need like a big budget to check that, right?
That's right. Yeah. So one of the innovations that we're bringing to this industry of health and wellness is the ability to enter into the world of conducting clinical research and doing the science without worrying about that high bar of cost, academic expertise, the ivory tower scientist that most people perceive as what is needed in order to conduct these type of clinical research studies. That is something of the past. And with what we've built at People Science and with what has been happening for the last 10 years with the digitizing and modernizing of clinical research, technology is really making this world more accessible for people who want to ask questions. So yes, we support CPG, consumer product good brands who want to conduct clinical research studies to test their products on consumers. We also support larger ingredient companies. So many of the products that we see, the finished brands that we see in the storefronts of health and beauty are finished products that have ingredients that were purchased from ingredient manufacturers. And those manufacturers have the responsibility of conducting the rigorous science to show that what they're saying is what it does. And then the finished products then say, okay, I will buy that particular ingredient to put into my formulation and then market it using the science, that has been conducted.
I'm very curious to know how many of those products that they really say what is written on the ingredient is really, really what is really happening. And this is great that we can prove or not.
Yeah. I feel so dismayed about this, Crina. And I'll say, as one example, what can we believe, as consumers on marketing? And one thing I will say is, if you can do enough research when you're selecting a product to know that the manufacturing is high quality, and in the vitamin supplement world, there are certain standards that manufacturing can be done according to, like GMP, good manufacturing practices. And
but how do we know that? Like, for example, if we really buy a product, and now I'm trying to come back to this 85 or whatever is the percent at the end. This is kind of the percent that I kind of discover in my beauty products as well. Of course, I don't know. I'm just using some apps to figure out the ingredients. Of course, I'm not a specialist. I'm trying to learn and to figure out, is it this true or not? As a consumer, how can we really figure out that? Because if we see made in whatever is made, how as a consumer we find out that this is the right product or not?
the answer to that is focus on the bright spots if you want to stay optimistic. And what I mean by that is, in the way, at least in the US, that natural products, supplements, nutraceuticals are marketed, it's very different than drug development, meaning the regulatory, the regulations are different. So, in the natural products world, in nutraceutical supplements, vitamins, products and brands will market whatever they want, and they take the risk if they get challenged or if there's a class action lawsuit or someone calls them out on it. And in the drug development world, you can't get away with that. And it's that's what's dismaying for me as a consumer. And the bright spot I will say in all of this is that what I'm seeing as a business person in this ecosystem, which has been so fun for me as a consumer, as a woman who is very much invested in these types of interventions, is that there is increasing awareness among manufacturers and brands that they're going to need to listen to their consumers if they want their business to continue to grow. And consumers can demand in however way they want. I mean, it's through your pocketbook. Are you going to buy it or not? Demand that there be more transparency in how the science was done. And for one example, I would say, we have some beauty stores here. I live in Los Angeles. I would try to dig into so yes, you look at the ingredients. And then what I'm learning in the last couple of years is there's something called branded ingredients. I don't know how many listeners are aware of branded ingredients. Branded ingredients are the ingredients that actually are higher quality and more costly than any other ingredient out there. That ashwagandha is an ingredient of our moment right now.
Collagen, right? Or
yeah, many of these wellness ingredients. And there are certain manufacturers and branded ingredient companies that actually do the rigorous, high quality science to show that these do what they say they do. And I don't know that most consumer products out there will indicate the brand of an ingredient because I don't know that we know to look for it. So that's one way to look for quality in terms of, am I buying what I think I'm buying, where it's saying, this is going to help me with my sleep, for one example. So that's one bright spot I would say is as consumers, we can all do more and even engage if you're willing to. And I think it's worth our time, engage with these brands and say, like, what's the science? Tell me, where did you source this active ingredient? And what that does is there's this trickling effect to the actual brands and manufacturers to say, okay, we need to do better science. We need to publicize it, and we need to educate consumers about what it's all about. And how we think about it at People Science is not hard to understand. I think that the pandemic is a great example of where science and complex mathematics and statistics immediately became something people could understand, because we were all living it, we cared about it. And that's ultimately how we learn, is when you're in it, you really can learn to understand complex concepts very well. And I feel like the science of products that intervene with our physiology and our health and wellness is very understandable, if we are open to it. And we in the ecosystem of supporting science, People Science, and our clients and others can also publicize information in a way that's very digestible.
But many of my listeners, because I get a lot of feedback, they will say, but I don't have time to do all this research. Yeah. And on the other side, you have so many noise around. Everyone, they are talking, oh my God, this is good, try this. You just go and browse around. I don't know how many they really are taking this step forward and really talk right down to the brand and ask more information about that. Yeah. I think that's something that definitely we need to be more active if we care to really make a change.
I agree with you. We can be more advocates for those of us who have children or those of us who have loved ones who are young and think about future generations. And of course, all of us who care about planetary health and sustainability and our environments, this is something that we can take the time to do. I will say, I was at a meeting where there was a person, an expert speaking about AI, and in particular large language models, and I thought this was really fascinating, which was the the concept that today, who do we listen to? We listen to influencers, like all of the digital marketing that pushes certain messages to us based on how we're engaging. And then, the question of trust is always there. In the future, what will happen is if we truly have access to all the information out there and the large language models have access to it, the influencers become the data. It's not a person who has the best marketer and the best photo shoots and the best that people listen to anymore. It is the data. And to me, I feel like that's where we can begin to engage more is we start we participate in the research ourselves. We ask the questions and say like, well, show me the data, for this particular brand. What is the branded ingredient? What is the data behind the branded ingredient? And I feel like in that engagement, we will cause a shift to happen in the knowledge base that is ultimately changing every minute of the day.
I can't not ask you as a woman, and I'm sure that I would like to really take a little bit your experience to really give us some, if you can, advices of some brands that you find them clean or vitamins that you find them clean. Obviously, I don't know if you can share that because you are in charge with some other brands. I don't know if you can do that, but I would love to get your feedback about this, if you can share some brands.
I know as a listener, if I were a listener, I would be writing things down too. And to be honest, I feel like I'll give you how I approach supporting and selecting brands.
Yes.
And I also want to acknowledge that I have a certain level of privilege that most people don't, as a physician and a scientist who speaks to senior leadership in the natural products and supplement health and wellness world.
And see so many clinical.
Yes, I have access. Absolutely. And what I will say is how I navigate choosing a particular brand for myself is understanding one, what's the level of science that has gone into that particular product manufacturing. And there are brands out there where you look at their website and yes, it might seem daunting at times. And I feel like a lot of them that are doing really well in terms of selling to consumers, they're making the information accessible. So do your homework there. And I would say for now, until they have good science, stay away from new brands if there isn't solid science yet. So certain established brands, they've done their homework. And then what you can do also is they're manufacturers, and I know this is these aren't brand names that are even recognizable to most of us because they're the B2B. So these are the branded ingredients companies that sell to all of the fancy brands that we see, in the marketplace. Yeah. And finding those types of manufacturers and then going to what their branded ingredients are, and then looking to where are those products being put in, in the finished brands. I think that's a good way to select a brand as well. I can send you, Crina, some of those ingredient companies, and if you wanted to share with your audience in some other way.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible because I am on this journey as well, and I want to really make sure that the research and the information that I get are the right ones. So if you can share this with us, will be fantastic. Mm-hmm. We had the discussion before, and because we are talking about beauty, we were touching as well the concept of microbiome. Can you explain the concept of the microbiome and how it relates to beauty and the skincare?
I love the microbiome story. For the audience, background-wise, my PhD is in immunology. And back when I was doing my thesis, I studied a very interesting discovery called the toll-like receptors, which were pattern recognition receptors that were discovered to be a key part of how our immune system recognizes all the external pathogens, as we call it, and even like pathogens meaning bad organisms and good organisms, and it like how it actually then communicates it to our own bodies. Because prior to that, we had no idea. Like, how do we know that that was Staphylococcus? How do we know that that was E. coli or, Candida? And it's these receptors that say, okay, I recognize that there's a pattern that's been preserved for millions of years. And now my body's immune system recognizes, and then everything takes off. And that was my PhD thesis. And
Amazing.
what I'm what I'm learning about the microbiome today is back to the concept that I raised earlier, which is that every single day knowledge is shifting, and it's because of all the research that's happening. And as one example of that, I was looking into what's the latest, in the microbiome since I was reading about it maybe just a handful of years ago. And something that was really interesting to me is, so the concept of the microbiome is that we have all kinds of microorganisms that coexist with us on our bodies that are necessary for our physiological health and function. And these microorganisms include bacteria, fungus, viruses, all kinds of microorganisms, where in the past we would think, oh, anything that is like a microorganism is bad. And that is not the case at all. And so what the discoveries have shown is that on the skin and the gut in particular, because these are the areas of our body, our epithelial surfaces that come in contact with all of these organisms in our environment. And you can think of it as really connected, our skin and our gut, because through our mouth, our skin then connects, orally into our gut, and then out in our genitourinary system, back onto our skin. And what the research has shown so far is that there's approximately a 1-to-1 ratio of the number of human cells in our body to the number of microorganisms in our bodies, which is astounding. And
Wow.
as an example, a few years ago, they used to think it was 10 microorganisms to one human cell, but now with research, it's showing it's about 1-to-1. And something else too that's really interesting for the audience is for those who have gone into trying to learn more about the gut microbiome, you've probably heard about how diversity is a good thing. So the more diverse your gut microbiome, the better. And what's interesting about diversity is that it shifts from day to day. So if you had a terrible night's sleep, or you had something that happened that was out of the ordinary, your diversity will shift. And then also something to know is that the diversity being high is not desired for every part of your body. So for women in particular, vaginal microbiome diversity, you want it to be low. And this is also from research finding, what's the ideal ecosystem to decrease the likelihood of, candidiasis, bacterial vaginosis, and all these common issues that women suffer from. So there's a lot to know there. And what I will say is that even for myself as a consumer, I struggle with knowing how to take care of my microbiome because of all the knowledge that's out there. And it is around, Crina, it's what you opened up with. When I read headlines, I'm just like, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? And I think what we can all do is to step back, take a few deep breaths, and not internalize all of these new headlines all the time, and to always come back to centering on kind of like the knowledge of many, many generations. Sleep well, take care of your body, keep moving, eat well, and maintain a sound mental health, and it's hard to hear because it's said over and over again, and it's hard for all of us to do. And I feel like what we're learning in the microbiome research is it comes back to that. I want to share something else too that I read. This is a study that came out in June of this year, where they studied non-industrialized populations in Latin America. And a lot of the microbiome research these days, that's very exciting, is happening in studying these communities outside of industrialized countries, because the goal there is, one, to understand epidemiologically, if cardiovascular disease, diabetes, acne, eczema doesn't exist in these communities, what are they doing right? And what is their microbiome? What's the signature? And so many of the studies are looking at that. And in this one particular study, they actually found that over 50% of the associations of certain types of bacteria in the gut were related to socioeconomic lifestyle factors, which is fascinating. And this was like rural villages in Honduras. And I was like, this is fascinating. So anything like having a television, being in a home where there were dirt floors, all these different types of factors were looked at in this massive study looking at the data to try to see where are their associations. And that's only the beginning of it. And I think as a consumer, what would I do with that headline? I would say, okay, it comes back to, my environment matters. If I can live in an environment that brings me more balance, and it will then also lead to a more healthy microbiome. So there's a lot more that is only beginning to surface in terms of all the research of the microbiome. And I think when we're choosing products out there and how to take care of it, of our gut, I think a few years ago, people were thinking, okay, the more CFUs, the better. And that's not necessarily the case. Research is showing. And so back to how do we choose the right products? I think it's doing the research on the quality of the manufacturing, and also asking ourselves, do I need to take this supplement, or can I simply eat more fresh vegetables and fruits? And I know that's hard for all of us, especially for those of us with professional lives and, families to take care of and industrialized environments.
For me, it was such a good exercise when living in San Francisco for many years and then moving to Italy, where I tried to really figure out, because I see all these old people that they are like 90 years old. Mm-hmm. And I try to really ask them, okay, what is your secret? And most of them, they tell me things like, I'm eating just pasta with tomato, I'm working. Every day they have a purpose. They work 70 to 20 hours, and they do it because they choose to do that. They have a pleasure of doing that. And they socialize, like you said. We are searching so much, but for me it was such a good example, looking around. They do sport without even, of course, it's another lifestyle here. Mm-hmm. You learn to take it very easy, even if you don't want to. And when I'm talking about that, it's like when you stay in line to buy something, you wait. Everything is piano, piano. But it's a way of living. And when I think about my grandmother, this is kind of how she lived back in time. Uh-huh. Obviously, it's not easy for everyone to do that, but it was as well a confirmation of what you mentioned before, back to simplicity and back to the original way of doing things.
Yeah. I feel like I was in Costa Rica this summer. It was beautiful, and pura vida is what they say there, which is like piano, piano, I guess, in your culture. And I feel like in the stress that we bring to ourselves, in thinking that we're not doing enough, we're actually occupying a lot of our bandwidth that diminishes the spaciousness that we need to simply coexist with our environment that is ready to receive us, in a way to be well. And I talk about this with people where, at some of these natural products business gatherings, it's always fun because I will ask people, what are you taking, for your supplements, and what are you doing for your health? And more often than not, many of them are taking, I mean, it's kind of astounding, like 20 to 60 supplements regularly.
Wow.
And then they say, and they acknowledge, I feel like I'm getting stressed worrying about what I'm taking, and if it's the right thing. And that to me is the crux of the pitfall of all of what we're doing today, is we're creating so much more complexity. Back to, and knowledge is changing every day. So how do you know what you think is right for you today with the 20 to 60 supplements you're taking is doing anything anyways? Something I remember when I was a medical student training, and this was before smartphones were as widely used and the internet and the information was widely used as it is today. The attending physicians would say, medical knowledge is turning over pretty much every 4 years. And I was like, what? So that means like
Wow.
during my training, by the time I'm out practicing, a lot of what I learned today is going to be different. And they're like, yeah, that's kind of how it is. And it's true. I when I finished my training as a dermatologist and then did my pathology training, what is in practice today and the decision making that dermatologists, physicians have to make, it's actually pretty different. And, I think it speaks to how we have all these complex systems of taking care of ourselves as human beings and our health systems. And people think there is a right way and there isn't, and we have to listen to ourselves. And there's a lot of the themes of personalization that also come up for me, and people science is really excited to be able to make a dent at the very least, and at the most make a huge impact in how we use data and evidence that is more specific and personalized to each of us. And it's so critical. So much knowledge that's out there right now about the microbiome, even about skin, is based on very non-diverse research. And then it gets expanded from that, and we don't go back to studying more and more communities to understand, okay, well, is it true for this community? Maybe not,
But is it true, speaking about that, is it true that just recently, especially when we talk about, of course, drugs is FDA and so on, but is it true that most of the drugs and in general, they've been tested, most of the men, and now they include female into the studies? This was something that I was completely shocked. Is it true?
It is true. So historically, the majority of drugs that are the most commonly marketed drugs for cardiovascular health, for diabetes, you name it, are on clinical trials where most of the participants are men. And I'll add though that it is changing, and grateful for what's happened in the last 10 years, in my partner in my prior company, Science 37, where we pioneered the decentralized clinical trials model. And what that did was it brought technology into the mix of conducting clinical research studies, where you could then recruit diverse populations of people,
Amazing.
more women, more people from communities of different socioeconomic backgrounds, more ethnicities. And it's really shifted this whole world of clinical research. And it's one of the fundamental ways that people science is also using the tool to broaden how we do research.
How long ago has been the switch from doing using only men for these clinical trials to really, are we talking about 10 years or we take about less?
We're talking, I don't want to misspeak here. I want to say it was, about 10-ish years when there was an NIH mandate that said you have to, in your clinical trial design, you have to include women. And this was a recent thing. It doesn't mean that no women were included in prior studies. However, it is true that they were always a minority prior to that, like this is required. It is astounding. And I think also it's important to note that most prescription drugs that are out there today, most of them have not been tested on the majority of people who are getting them to be prescribed, because that's the way clinical
Terrible.
trials works. And it's part of, it's not that the institutions have done wrong. It's that the systems were built in a way that can't efficiently, cost effectively scale. And coming back to technology, we are coming to a place where we can actually include more people, and there's some catching up to do. What's exciting in this, so bright spots. I love to
I
focus on
like that
that.
you all the time
Yeah,
moving us to the
yeah.
positive part. We need that.
I
Definitely, we
I
need that.
thank you. In our studies so far with people science, and a lot of our studies are around health and wellness indications like anxiety, sleep, focus. Um, I would say indications that people actually care about, you know, more so than the drug development world can focus on, and primarily because the drug development world needs medical diagnoses. It has to be proven that it is a problem. And for us, when we're otherwise quote unquote healthy, there's nothing to treat according to our system. So anyways, with people science, we are addressing these other needs of most people. And what we're finding, which is so cool to see, and it's around the methodologies and the technology that we're using to conduct our studies and recruit. Women have been the majority in some of our studies, where we'd have to say, okay, let's see if we can recruit more men. And I think, isn't that interesting? And part of it is because, women as consumers are much more engaged in this marketplace and in getting involved and participating. And that's very exciting to me. It also gives me a lot of hope about how women's health as a knowledge base can really shift significantly in the next many years, because women are getting so much more involved, and because digital technology and digital health technology is part of what we're doing today. I think a lot of the frustrations that we have, and Crina, this is probably conversations in your other podcasts, of so little knowledge around women's health and our hormonal stages. And it's not only reproduction and menopause. There's so much, and it's so rich. It's
We know
I
more about
actually
the Uber driver than we know about our whole health system. Do you realize that? It's
that
really like
is
that.
that is
It's
so
crazy.
true. Yeah, I feel hopeful, based on what I'm seeing, that the health and wellness world, and in how we are all engaging as consumers of women, is going to be where new knowledge about women's health and the medical parts about women's health will be discovered. I think a lot is going to come up from that, and I feel like part of it is because medical systems and health systems are legacy systems that, like it or not, they move slowly. They're bureaucratic, and they need to do how they do things the way that they do.
Yeah.
And so where we can actually see things move more quickly, is in this ecosystem that's outside of those types of regulatory constraints. So this comes back to, yes, it's less regulated compared to drug development. However, there's so much freedom that we have, especially if we get involved as consumers and advocates, to make a lot of really great change happen.
I mean, definitely it's clear that the people, as you mentioned before, are paying more attention than ever to what they put in their bodies. This is something clear, and we hope that this will be more and more. You touched the topic about wellness industry, and I'm really curious. What trends are you observing there?
Yeah. The trends I'm observing are what I touched on before, which is there's more conversation around health problems that are not typical medical diagnoses. So sleep
Interesting.
is a big one,
Yes, I want to ask about sleep. You mentioned it, and I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
want to hear, what did you find out on your clinical trials with this sleep, and
Oh,
what
yes.
really works?
I will
Tell
be
us,
happy to share that.
please.
So back to your first question. I'll come back to that
Yes,
one, Karina.
I have so
So
much
yeah,
to do.
there's so much.
We need an episode too.
Yeah. So what's really fun is, gut health. Well, that's not a medical problem. Gut health is something we care about. And so it's around these indications, these health needs of consumers, that is a really exciting shift and change in the health and wellness space, which I'm so happy about. We're not constrained to, in the US, it's ICD-10 codes, which are these diagnostic codes for health problems. And the challenge, of course, in this trend is that in how clinical research is typically conducted, people are looking for the ivory towers approach. It's like, what's the medical problem? How do you recruit people with these diseases? And so we really have to shift our mindset there. And the way that I would think about solving for that is you start with a platform that is high quality and rigorous, which is what we've done. And then you recruit people who are real people and you study them. And that's how you discover. So to sleep, we've done a few sleep studies right now. And sleep was an indication that we landed on pretty early on when we were developing our platform called Chloe, because there's so much questions and needs out there. And we had many products and brands who were interested in it. And also, sleep is a really important study that it's a really important health area where the objective and subjective measures, and what I mean by that is how did I feel in the morning after I took my intervention, and how many hours of sleep did I get? That's objective, and what was my heart rate variability, over the few days or weeks of having this new sleep intervention. So these types of measures we could capture because our platform also integrates a lot of the new exciting health technologies like wearables. So for those of you who have one of the things of the moment, and I imagine in a few years there will be more, is the Oura Ring, for sleep and also cardiovascular health, and all the different wearables like the Garmin, Apple Watch, Fitbit, all the Samsung. There's so many out there that are actually quite high quality to include in these types of studies. And we can capture what is objective, which is so important because when you put that side by side with subjective, it gives you a bigger and better picture of what's actually really happening.
Yeah.
So we conducted a few sleep studies. One of them was a cannabinoid by a product brand. Another one was a botanical product. And it was very interesting what we found. Both of them, fortunately, had positive results for the sponsors of the study. And I will add, research, it's important that we acknowledge that research can show that things don't work.
What are you doing in this case? What are you doing in this case when a company is coming to you and said, I want to prove this? What are you doing?
What are we doing? Well, we approach it as the scientists, so we design the study with the rigor and the protocol of, these are the endpoints, as we call it, that matter. These are the ways that we're collecting the objective and subjective measure. This is the technology that has all the audit trails. So there's so many technical parts about actually conducting the study and collecting the data, which, by the way, is all automated. So people who don't know how to do the research don't have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. So we're designing the study with rigor as scientists. And then the sponsors will provide the product and we test it. We recruit the participants and we conduct the study from end to end. And then the end result is, we do the analysis and, show did it work or did it not, based on the effect size, based on the statistical analysis plan. And we have had sponsors in this particular scenario of, we call it our full service. We also license our platform, by the way, which is where we see the scale and the growth of more people getting into research as they can license the platform and it's very easy to use. But in these other scenarios where we supported the sponsors, one sponsor was testing a botanical product as a topical for eczema, and it didn't work so well. And that was actually a good thing in that it helped that brand to
work more
to shift their priority. Yeah, and maybe to look for another indication, to put another product that they were kind of trying to decide between, like, okay, maybe this one is better. So there's a win-win for everyone coming in as stakeholders in the research mindset, because you simply want to know, and there is a way to ask the questions and to know, and then ask the follow-up questions that matter. So yeah, I'm a total science geek. I'm a convert, and I actually feel like everyone can be. You know, I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be this threshold that only the ivory towers understand. There's a really wonderful Carl Sagan quote back in '96. I found it online somewhere, and I can't repeat it verbatim, but the message is that every single person was born a scientist, and then something happens in our socialization and acculturation that takes that out of us.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think the message there is like we're all born curious. We all are born to want to know and to understand and to keep asking questions. And that to me is the fundamental quality that we can tap into all of us. And I'll share one more anecdote around that. You know, as a dermatologist, I
Please.
get, of course, a lot of texts from my dear friends about what do you think about this product? Or like, can you look at this?
We
And
can understand them.
yeah, they have the bat line, as I say to me, and I will, engage them and ask them questions, and really inevitably, what I find them doing is going in their own journey of being scientists themselves. The types of questions they're asking me are the questions that a scientist would ask. And then where they need just a little bit of nudging and support is knowing what to do next. It's like, oh, how do I test that? How do I know, if it's working? Do I need to do something else? And I do feel, I imagine among the audience, and you, Crina, and me for sure, every single day we're thinking about something that you could frame as, oh, that's kind of like being a scientist or like being a detective. We're
Yeah, I'm
trying
sure.
something and looking for what the outcome might be.
I'm sure it's such a beautiful reminder to be curious. I
Yes.
just recently re-listened When Diane. I don't know if you're familiar with him,
Mm-mm.
and he's unfortunately he's not alive anymore. But he speaks, and recently I heard about that, how important it is to have imagination and curiosity, and how
Yes.
important it is to even read to our kids fairy tale stories, that we are really
Mm.
using our imagination. And I think we should read some fairy tale stories that
Yes.
we can go there and develop our curiosity, and not just all the time doing and being this hamster wheel. It was such a good
Yeah.
reminder. So thank you so much for mentioning that. And I really hope
Mm.
that we can take this time, because
Yeah.
we are so limited on this planet, and we
Mhm.
should take time to do some other things than just running. And but of course, one of my role on this podcast is to try to find little shortcuts for my listeners,
Yes.
with people like, with the help, with the people like you, that hopefully we can in some way get these shortcuts. We were talking about sleep.
Mhm.
Before we finish this topic, and I know that we are getting closer to our ending of our discussion, what is your conclusion regarding sleep? Help us with some advices here, please.
Mm. I'll describe my own journey with
Yes,
sleep, um,
please.
and how I'm navigating that. I have two young children, and my youngest is almost two, and it's been this journey of looking at my own data, my wearables. So I wear an Aura ring right now, and I also have a Garmin. And what I've been doing is paying attention to what are my what are my evening routines, that then allow me to move into my going to sleep. And I sleep with our youngest right now. And and then what happens in the morning, in terms of like what my data show. And so much of this is what people probably read about all the time. And it's back to that, what I was describing before, Karina, of
Simplicity.
eat well, yeah, and also simplicity, eat well, don't use your device, if you can. And what I have started to learn to do is I have very high quality sleep. Having a 2 year old, almost 2 year old, it's kind of astounding to hear. And part of it is I've been very clear about drawing my boundaries of when I put away my devices. My phone is in another room, after a certain hour of the evening. And I have been very consciously testing, looking at my sleep data with testing how alcohol is impacting it. I know a lot of friends who I speak to who are using similar wearables have talked about that, the significance of that. So I've been paying attention to that.
So basically, if we drink alcohol in the night, in the evening, it's influencing our sleep.
Certain types of
Like
alcohol, yeah.
heartbeats, no?
Yeah, exactly.
Certain
So
type.
your base, that's right. Your base heart rate can increase, and also anything that's getting your gut, still digesting. So if you eat a lot or you eat late, that impacts your sleep. And something I learned, I was also wearing a CGM for a while, simply to learn and understand what was happening there. And I learned that I had these two stages of digestion for myself.
CGM, which is the
Oh, I'm sorry.
continuously glucose monitor
Yes, thank
device.
you. Yeah, continuous glucose monitoring, which in the US is now more and more accessible for consumers. And I think in
Amazing.
other countries, consumers can have them. So what I was learning was the way that I was eating my meals was probably eating a little bit too much, where my CGM was indicating I had these two stages of digestion, one later in the evening. And I was really fascinated by that and realized, well, maybe the way that I also do some intermittent fasting. And part of it is around, it keeps my day more simple when I don't have to worry about certain meals. And then what I was doing was eating heavier meals later, which wasn't so good for my sleep and also wasn't so good according to my CGM data. So paying attention to when I'm eating and the volume of food, and then the types of alcohol I consume. So, if it's like red wine or beer or a cocktail, those have different they impact me differently. And I keep coming back to me because I think it's important for our listeners to also always keep in mind what works and does something for someone else isn't necessarily going to be the case for you.
So true.
It's important to be curious and maybe test it out and see, okay, is it doing the same for me or not? And then continuing to explore and ask those questions.
Sunscreens, it's often considered a must-have for skin protection. But there are also some controversy surrounding certain ingredients. Can you discuss the pros and the cons of using sunscreen creams? Help me with this topic,
Yes,
please.
sunscreens. Sunscreens are such an important part of the dermatologist practice. And what I will say is that number one, ultraviolet rays are proven, so far as we know with science today, to cause skin cancers. The most common cancer in people with certain types of skin types, and in the US where I've practiced as a dermatologist, it's people who are fair enough to get skin cancers caused by UV. It's a skin cancer called basal cell carcinoma. That's the most common cancer. Unfortunately, it's very treatable and curable. We cut it out or we use topicals. That's caused by UV damage from the sun, oftentimes from decades of it, very common in fair-skinned people. And then UV damage also causes another type of more aggressive skin cancer called squamous cell carcinoma. And then the other most aggressive, or there's two more aggressive skin cancers caused by UV. One is melanoma, and not all melanomas are caused by UV. Some are, genetic, but there's melanoma, and then there's also Merkel cell carcinoma. And I'm saying all these diagnoses because these are known to be part of, the UV exposure. So that is a great example of why one needs to protect their skin from the sun. Now, coming back to sunscreens, sunscreens are great for protecting the skin from those types of UV, and there's different forms of UV. There's UVA, B, and C. UVA is a longer wavelength that penetrates the skin more deeply and causes the common problems of beauty of like wrinkles and pigmentation issues. UVB is a wavelength that causes the burning and causes most of those UV-related skin cancers. And sunscreens are designed to protect against those mainly. And so when you're using sunscreens, I like to say to people, try to balance it out with using sound judgment. Stay in the shade if you can. If you're out there playing sports, and you can wear a hat, use that. Um, and then using the sunscreens also for when you can't, stay away from direct rays like that. So being very pragmatic about it. And I know there's a lot of controversy with kids too, because we're putting something on their skin, and and my children, I sometimes have that mindset of what am I doing? Is this exposing chemicals to their skin too early? And what I do more than not is I try to put a hat on them and encourage them, to stay in the shade when they can. I think for the cons I mentioned, like putting chemicals on our skin, and then of course like the environmental issues. There's
Big
some research, and this comes back to our opening about the headlines. Some research that shows that some sunscreens can be taken up into the blood, and that's very scary for people, because there's the micronized, titanium dioxide, and that requires more research to understand what that exactly means. Because think of everything else that we put on our skin, from moisturizers to cosmetics. And there isn't research out there to try to detect how much actually goes into our blood. So keeping that all in mind, I think that how one can make decisions about sunscreen is, for me, back to me, I'll explain my approach. I've mainly used sunscreen on my face, as a woman, being vain and wanting to minimize the rate of photo aging and all of that. I found it very helpful for me to minimize those types of photo aging. And then I wear hats all the time, anytime there's like rays out there, to minimize the UV exposure as well. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I feel like there isn't a right answer except for what feels right for someone. In my ideal future, the world views beauty as what happens with natural aging, and that we see the models of people who have wrinkles and more pigmentary issues that today are viewed as not beautiful. And maybe we think more about, sun exposure and UV exposure as, minimizing the risk of skin cancers more than anything. I know in the beauty world, a lot of it is around cosmetics, and there's nothing wrong with that. I can identify with that. And I feel like it's important for us, to make the right decisions for ourselves and our beliefs. Yeah.
One of the things that I really learned as a little science here is that I realized that even on our mobile, where you check the weather, you can actually see the UV rating on that specific time.
Yes.
So if it's basically between 1 and 2, you can be out based on
Yes.
some studies. And then when it's going up, then, so like even try to measure this level, and it's easy to find it on your mobile, where you have the weather forecast.
Yeah.
But I understand that it's kind of listening to ourselves, but still, there are some ingredients in those sunscreens that they are based on some. So I have an app that I scan the products, and in some of the sunscreens, and not only, I discover different ingredients which they are hazardous considered.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the comment, you see that depends of the quantity that specific product it's used in that cosmetic sunscreen product, which we don't know. It's not written there if it's in this product we have less than 1%, but can affect so many issues, from endocrinologic problems, cancer, hormones. And I found in Italy one product for babies that it was going in this direction, and it was having a high level. They said it's a high level. But still, how can we find a base between, okay, are at least some of the ingredients that we should step back, even though we don't know the concentration of that? Can we find a solution here?
We need more science and we need more data, especially about how it impacts us individually. I know that feels like a frustrating answer because it doesn't quite tell us exactly what to do. And I feel like in my own experience, I actually have allergies to sunscreens. It's
Wow.
something that I learned early on. Actually, when I was a dermatology in training, I started to develop a photoallergic reaction to a chemical sunscreen called oxybenzone. And increasingly people are finding, because it's, more and more products have it, it's one of the blockers for UV, that people develop this allergic reaction where you've applied it, you get a very itchy, bumpy, rash. And what was interesting was, in the past decade or less, I then developed more allergies to other sunscreen ingredients that I wasn't allergic to before, like avobenzone and octocrylene. Like, they're all of these, and so I I don't really have the answer in terms of, what we stay away from, except to say that, in a scenario like my own, like, for sure, I stay away from all those products. And the sunscreens I use are like the mineral ones, and only have the non-chemical sunscreens, as they would call it. And then whenever possible, if I can use a hat and go out in the day when there is a lower UV, exposure, I would make decisions like that. So it's tough. It's tough today, because another thing I'll add that is part of the narrative of we simply don't know.
We simply don't know.
Yeah, is our environments. We have so many exposures living in industrialized communities that it could be some interaction that we won't learn about until in the future, where more science is coming into play. And
Proof. Yeah.
yeah,
That's the thing
and
that I'm like,
yeah.
I'm in some cosmetic spaces and I see young generations, and I have an 11-year-old girl that she starts to really be into makeup and
Yeah.
even,
Yes.
anyway, all these products. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Obviously, we have to wait for the science to prove that maybe some of them will prove or not that they are dangerous, but maybe it will be too late. So somehow better we take the hat and try to go into more safe place.
Yeah. Yeah. If when my daughter is older, if she is able to listen and really understand, my beliefs around this as they are today, my advice to her would be, wear your natural beauty, and stay away from direct bright sunlight, when you can, and have a tendency to behave in a certain way that will eventually make your future more safe, from the things we worry about. And
Absolutely.
I feel like we didn't get a chance to talk about biological aging, and there's
I
so much
know.
science there that's super interesting and new and only beginning. And I can think of a future where a lot of the research that is only starting to come out today may lead to a future where they are repairing DNA, in a way where UV exposure doesn't lead to these types of cancers. And for the beauty industry, UV exposure doesn't cause the collagen degradation and, the
Really?
pig there. Well,
There's
I'm saying this
studies.
as a future. Well, it's around, studying. It's such basic science today. And this is my visioneering of the future, where if you can alter certain ways that transcription is happening. Transcription is one of the very steps from DNA to protein synthesis. there's some exciting new research around that beyond what we know today about aging, like DNA methylation and all of the blood analytes that go into those calculations. It's only the beginning. There's a lot more that we don't know. So yeah. So if we can be natural today as much as possible and really live in and see the beauty within ourselves of how we're showing up, I think that's the challenge for many of us, especially those of us who are grooming the next generation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Belinda. We've been exploring so many exciting topics today, and so many that we are on the waiting list because we wanted to touch many others, but hopefully we will have another episode together. As we wrap up, I would love to know, what's one piece of advice or wisdom you would like to leave to our listeners to help them to dream again, whether it's pursuing their dream, passion, creativity, or anything else?
In my meditations over the last couple years, a major theme that continues to come up for me is slow down. And slow down as I unpack it, it's letting go of certain beliefs and even unlearning certain beliefs that are causing me to want to do things that occupy my bandwidth and don't allow me to have the spaciousness to really be, and be in my own true self and enjoy that. And there's a book that has been really wonderful in my household because I have it on my bedside, and it was sitting for a while on our kitchen counter where anyone could flip it open. And it's a version of the Tao Te Ching. Mm-hmm. And there is a verse in it that really spoke to me in I like to call it my scientist, physician, materialist, reductionist kind of thinker, bumping up against this other part of me that's a human being who is actually, I feel very spiritual as well. And it's verse 71 for those of you out there who have a version or a translation. And the crux of the message that I took away from that was that the more we know, the less we know. And it is this feeling of letting go of these, whatever is holding us into these fixed moments that doesn't let us slow down and really absorb everything and all the richness that's around us to teach us. Because I do believe we all have our own inner wisdom to learn in our environment. And when I'm riffing about all of these potential mechanisms of how this and that works on the skin and microbiome and talking to friends in my academic circles.
Which is kind of the opposite of
the other
side.
I come back to, I've shared with one of my friends who's an academic physician scientist, and I said, have you seen verse 71 of the Tao Te Ching, by the way? And I'll share it. And my friends and we will laugh and receive that with gratitude, and some humor, because it's all about sharing with one another, like you're doing with your podcast here and the audience. And slowing down and knowing that you have the wisdom within yourself, believe it or not, and you can live well in that way.
Thank you so much, Belinda. It was such a pleasure and an honor having you here.
Thank you, Crina. This was a wonderful conversation.